on our meeting here, which is approval of agenda. There are no changes, so we will move to approval of minutes. So entertain a motion to approve the November 10th meeting.
So moved.
Christina Ford, second.
Okay. Any discussion on that? Any changes? Seeing none, we will do we can just do all in favor, can say aye, raise your hand. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Passes unanimously. This way it's a little easier for Lisa. Okay, at this time, we will open up public participation. If you could please list your name and your address, and you will have 2 minutes. Dr. Willett will put look at, he already has the timer up on there. So if you are virtual, please raise your hand, and if you're in the room, you can speak. This time, if anyone would like to speak, please raise your hand. People probably left their computers on and took off and check them back. But okay, we will close the public participation and we will go to correspondence. So we will have Jacob.
And just to note, this is for the November 10th and 17th correspondence reports. So we had an email criticizing a political cartoon that appeared in a 7th grade assignment. The author requests that politics of all persuasions be left out of the classroom. Another email criticizing a political cartoon. The author felt it was not appropriate material for the classroom. We had an email defending the use of political cartoons in school settings as a learning tool. The author was also concerned with the fact that a photo of an assignment was shared and the negative effects the incident may have on the staff involved. An email encouraging the district to adopt the screen-in state policy for quarantining students. An email thanking the superintendent for setting up a COVID-19 vaccine clinic. And another email thanking the district for setting up the COVID-19 clinic. An email expressing disapproval over the COVID-19 clinic. The author feels that the discussion around vaccinating one's child should be between parents and their pediatrician. An email concerning testing protocols for field trips. An email expressing various concerns about the COVID-19 clinic, including the rights of parents and liability for errors that may occur. And another email to that same effect regarding the COVID-19 clinic. The author does not believe that schools are the proper place for such clinics. And finally, an email inquiring about mental health services and support staff offered by the district.
At this time, I'll open it up for points of information for any board members or Dr. Willett.
Yeah, I mean, I think most of the things that I would say about it, I covered in the responses I provided, to the variety of issues that were raised. And I guess I would just defer to those responses, unless there's any direct questions.
Anyone else? Okay. We will close that off and we will move to the student representatives report for Emily and Natalie. Hello, ladies.
Hi.
Thank you for staying with us.
So this week is the food drive and it's ending on the 19th, just Friday, but we didn't get that many donations, so we might extend it to next week. And then wellness week is coming up, so we're setting up speakers and raffles and things like that for
and also I'm working on getting in contact with some other schools so I can start sharing some information about them. I feel like we talk a lot about the high school, not about other schools. So I'm working on that.
That's great. Thanks,
Fantastic. I love that idea because I don't think that anyone has done that in the past. So that would be a really new
Very
way
cool.
of doing
Yeah.
things. Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And so you said the food donation was until the 19th, but then it could be extended, and then also that the wellness is happening next week.
Yes.
Hey girls, can I ask a question? The raffles you're setting up, are you seeking donations?
We're still trying to come up with, like, we haven't really talked about it that much, but
Okay.
we might be. I can
Just let the board know
Yeah.
when you do, because I'm sure
Yeah,
there might be some people happy to donate.
yeah, but I can bring that up in our next meeting on Monday.
Thank you, ladies. Okay, let's move on to the superintendent's report for the CRF.
So as you know, The coronavirus relief fund was set up last year. The town had set it up in agreement with the Board of Education. It was structured so that the end of year funds could then roll over and fund some, in part or whole, some aspect of operations that we would need with respect to the pandemic and different pandemic needs. At the time, I know our board chair had been requesting to meet on this and a variety of other things. For whatever reason, that wasn't able to happen at the time. So where we're at right now is that agreement, the coronavirus relief fund, did have an expiration time of September if it wasn't acted upon prior to that time. So at this point, that fund, the town council would have to reinvigorate or agree to extend that and bring that fund back online. You recall that at the end of the last year, in the last fiscal year, the Board of Ed, had communicated to the town, vis-a-vis me communicating with the town, that a split of the funds was requested, a 50-50. So that of the 796,000, that 50% of that would go to coronavirus relief fund, and the other 50% would go to the ERF. And the coronavirus relief fund was not continued, that up to the 1% limit, it would be put into the ERF. That request for ERF is pending. The ERF, just as a note or asterisk, doesn't get finalized until the third fiscal quarter of the year. So that money wouldn't actually, regardless of whether it's going into the CRF or the ERF, both those monies, at least explicitly in the ERF's case, would not be actually put into that account until the audit was complete in the third quarter of this current year. So where you're standing right now is that there'll be a council board joint meeting on the 29th. The FFC did take up the conversation today, potentially what would be requested from the CRF for this year. I've recommended that most of it be staff, but I'll defer to Chairperson Griffin for some information about what we talked about today, and I can provide a spreadsheet if so desired, with a short, very simple spreadsheet of the initial conversation we had based on what you want to talk about.
So we basically talked about kind of presenting something to the council in 3 phases. We wanted to first kind of say why we had $796,000 remaining of our fiscal year 21 balance. So Dr. Will's going to kind of pull the bigger numbers that we talked about when we went over the year-end numbers. And then one thing I thought was important to also present to the council was we've obviously, as everybody's heard the words ESSER more times than not over the past several months, talk about what ESSER funds we have received or we are slated to receive, and then what we're planning on doing with them. So we have very specific, Dr. Willett has earmarked, some of the funds for the social worker, for the school psychologist, counselor, and then the additional Birch Grove teachers. So we kind of want to also let the council know that we recognize that we have gotten that federal money, but this is what we are using that to also combat, coming out of this pandemic. And then the third part of the presentation would be about what specifically are we thinking of using if they approve this COVID relief fund again, what are we looking to do with that money? And Dr. Willett has shown us some, the associate educators, and also a big chunk of it will be the continuation of the extended school year program, AKA summer school, for 2022, because we're anticipating pretty much really everybody who probably participated last year, will participate again. And then, obviously there could even be some more students depending on, how this year goes. So that was kind of what we said, put it in 3 steps, presented to them, give them obviously a narrative, but also present some real numbers so we can show them why we really feel that we have a need. And I think that, everything we talked about today, I think will show that, this is, we know that this is a long-term effect of coming back from this pandemic. So it would be really helpful to have this additional money. So I think that's it. Tony, Dana, do you have anything to add that I might have missed?
I think, we talked a lot about the educational needs, right? And there's some good points for a 1-pager or 2-pager for the council. And so it's just our turn to advocate with them with what our school system needs. Tony, was your first FFC, how did that
It was
Yeah.
intriguing.
A lot of numbers.
Now, will you be creating that 1-pagers with Dr. Willett to share onto the dashboard prior to the meeting?
Yes.
So that we can have
Yeah,
everybody, you
I'll
guys can be,
do a prototype and share with Kristen, and then when she's looked at it, she'll share it with you guys. And I'll post it when everybody's good with it.
Okay.
that'll be perfect, just to get you guys up to date with how everything's changed, because I mean, there's a lot of numbers went into everything, and a lot of coaching, so.
I feel like we've been talking about this for a long
For a
time
long
now.
time.
So,
For a long time.
but I think we have a good plan, and I think we'll be in good shape for the joint meeting.
Okay, perfect.
Lori had her hand up, sorry.
So I listened to FFC today. I'm glad I did because I felt better prepared coming into this agenda. The committee work is there's definitely a lot of work that goes on there, but it did leave me with more questions. So I got 3. Is there money left in the CRF? Okay, so we use that all. So if we wanted to advocate for the fund again, what you guys talked about in FFC, we would put that money, we would advocate to the capital for the CRF to continue and then put that money there for the spreadsheet that you guys are going to work on and what you guys talked about in FFC today, right?
Correct.
Okay. So the associate educators, now that there's no quarantines, are they, and I guess this is more a question for you, what are they doing?
So we'll get into this next, but there still are quarantines.
Yeah, okay,
It's just that screen to stay only applies to people that work in school.
okay,
So anything athletics, anything from parties, outside activities, travel this, travel that, whatever, any child who is quarantined in those situations has to stay out of school.
okay,
And so there are still out of school quarantines right now. And there's both. So
okay,
in a way, it kind of makes it even more kind of broken out a bit. Those individuals are still working in that role to that
Okay.
end. And there's also students with special education who require some assistance in those situations.
so still much needed.
Yeah, they're still needed until quarantines fully end. I would say the A's are still a major part of the process of taking care of business for the kids that are unfortunately forced into quarantine. And there are still kids that are going to be forced into quarantine. because of we'll talk about exactly how that works.
And then my last question was just along the lines of, what the SR funds went to some one-time costs for learning loss and because of COVID. My concern with the COVID relief fund is that if we anticipate that these costs are going to be part of the operating budget, since the pandemic's never going away. Like, I don't want to have a $500,000 hole when that COVID relief fund goes away. I don't want a sinking fund for operating costs. I'd rather have a plan, like if you want to keep the associate educators beyond it, like, okay, let's start thinking about, okay, these are going to be in the budget here, but we don't need this anymore. We're not doing this program anymore, so this will cover that cost. That would just be like what I anticipate the council having a problem with too. And it does set us up, if they are operating costs, to have a $500,000 hole. And I think you had said that in FFC. So just something to think about, like when we're advocating for this, we're also going to have to talk about it during the budget process and not necessarily on the 29th.
I mean, a way you might want to think about it just from a contextual standpoint, and whether this is how people would want to process it or not. During the pandemic, there were certain things that were deeply impactful in a negative way. And then there were other things that occurred that gave you a little bit of space. And we'll talk about that space more officially when in this one page. But we have talked a little bit about it before. You saved some money on transportation. You saved some, these are big chunks that you saved because our buses weren't running for good chunks of time, et cetera, et cetera. So you manifest this, this money that you would have otherwise spent. And then as you go into the next phase of the pandemic, you needed AEs because now you had everybody back in school plus the quarantine populations. So the money you're requesting out of the CRF is money that you already do not have. You have 4 AEs on that you do not actually have funds for. You have the ESY if you're going to run it for general ed population this year to do what you did last year for those who have learning loss. It isn't in the fund for next year unless you were to put $250,000 for it into the coming budget. So the point is that this is something that you had for funds that you had left over. There's no silver lining to a pandemic, but the things you did gather funds from at the end of last year, this fund existed up to the point of September for the purpose of you being able to move it into the coming year to address the additional pandemic needs. Those additional pandemic needs are here and did follow you. And those funds were going to be there, as was the design of that fund, so that you could, if you saved it in one year, spend it in that next and not have to incur it in your operating, because it will probably not last here to into perpetuity. It's just that you won't have quarantine kids next year. But I don't really think you will. And if I had to conjecture, I would think in February a lot will change, because that's when certain nuclear powers end and everything is shifting in a certain direction. So the point is that was a noble fund created for the reason of being able to take care of business in the future. And that is what has happened to you. You have business to take care of in the future, and you're asking for CRF. And the chair did ask to have some meetings about that. Unfortunately, this is the soonest they could happen. And unfortunately, that extended beyond the September timeline. So you do have a legitimate reason to ask that get extended. And you did have money at the end, and you did have it segmented in the way you handled the end of the year, 50-50. So, and it would cover quite a bit of that. And it's not in the budget.
Just to kind of answer your question, Claire, I think kind of like what Dr. Willett's saying is we didn't know when we sent that budget to the council back in February, I think, that we were going to need this additional money. So now we have a little bit better idea. So when we do the next budget, if it turns out that we need another year of summer school, now we're going out to 2023, we would adjust our budget accordingly. So this was almost kind of emergency money. And I know what you're saying, that we don't want to get into the hole, but that's why we would have to adjust our next budget. And whether it's reallocate some of the existing money or whether it's add to it, that's something I think that we'll have to address in January, February, and kind of figure out where to go with the budget going forward, because no, we probably will not have this emergency kind of funding going forward. My guess is this will be our last shot to get this COVID relief fund.
Okay.
But we'll have to plan accordingly, when we work on our budget.
I would also say kudos to the council and the board for their foresight, because they did have this fund, and it was designed to, from the things you had last year, savings from transportation, et cetera, give you the chance to offset what is going to be the future impacts. It was a smart thing to do, and it still is. So September was the date, just timeline I did work, but that conversation then happens the 29th. You all did a very smart thing by allowing your money to move over to the next year to cover the bases that you wouldn't even have known you had, which this year turned out to be associate educators, potentially more learning loss that you don't have to put in your operating budget if it comes out of this.
Thank you, guys.
Any other comments or questions about the CRF? Okay, let's move on to the turf conversation, which is another, I believe you spoke about it.
So, yeah, this is, there's history here. There's documents on the Board of Ed dashboard that kind of lead up to it. It would take 2 hours to go through all of that right now, but I think people who have been following it did follow the conversation. It's also been in the minutes of prior meetings. So I won't restate all the things that have already been stated, but essentially at this point, you have a meeting coming up on November 29th, a joint meeting with the town council. And in that joint meeting, presumably you'll have a conversation about the field and grounds agreement, and potentially, how the turf fields and this turf field would be funded in terms of, its replacement. And, the replacement cost is, it's a significant one. And so that conversation we're having a conversation tonight, and FFC had a conversation about it to set the stage for you to be ready for that conversation on the 29th. So anything you need from me, I'd be happy to provide. I've put a lot of the documents up, including the town's documents and the ones that the board has already seen. And I'll just defer to Ms. Griffin for any other comments she'd like to make on that.
So, yeah, so we obviously, the turf field's been a big discussion the last couple of months. And I think we all kind of agreed today that we do need to have the discussion with the council. We need to come up with a plan, and we need to, come together and figure this out. We had a couple of ideas of future, and, we'll get into that, I think, at a little bit later, just as far as, how do we fund this? Do we fund it through capital? Do we fund it through operating? I personally would like to see the turf field continued. I don't think many of us want to see it removed and grass put back, but, we do have to talk about that, could be a possibility. And I think we just really need to figure out how to set the money aside. And one thing we talked about today also was we don't want to let this go and not have a plan for the next 10 years, because we do feel as though the last 8 years, kind of nobody talked about it. It was like the elephant in the room that nobody wanted to talk about, that eventually we're going to have to replace this $750,000 turf field. So I think really we just need to talk to the council, kind of see what they're thinking. How can we come together and figure out a way that we can work together and get this figured out? And I don't, like I said, we had some ideas, but I don't really know what the right answer is. This turf one is tough. It is. And I think, Dr. Willett brought up some excellent points. This isn't teachers. This isn't books. This isn't stuff. So we don't really want to take away from the education of our students for the field, but that doesn't mean we can just ignore it and say we're not going to be involved in it either. So that's kind of where we're thinking we've got to figure out a way that we can work together and figure this out, but have a long range plan, because I don't wish this on anybody to in 10 years from now to be going through this again with no plan. So, Jacob?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And whatever part of agreement we put together, there needs to be some sort of long-term part in the Fields and Grounds agreement or whatever, to determine what happens with that. I think I talked to you about this earlier, but just maybe Dr. Will has some other feedback. Basically, what we were looking at is whose capital budget it's going to go into, the town's or ours. And then this might be more of a town question, but still relevant to the discussions. Are they going to bond for it, or are they going to try to pay in cash either now or down the line? Is there another component I'm missing here? Because you can't take that out of your operating budget. I can't. I mean,
No,
definitely would want to.
Your,
Yeah,
your ERF has a provision for capital.
I think it would completely drain it though.
It would. The thing you have to keep in mind is, like, for instance, if you look at your transportation line now, you can have very large variations. Right now it's $300,000 negative, and that can change through your year as school systems can take on different things because of IEPs, things like that. So your ERF, is needed as a good. It's about 2.5% of your overall budget. I know that it's not a bad idea to have a rainy day kind of situation that's more than 2.5% of your budget for reasons like transportation. 300,000 could impact you, and that's 33% of the entire amount that's in there right now. And that's the deficit we have in transportation, that everything plays out exactly the same way it is. So your ERF is a good thing to maintain, and so keep that in mind, that you can use it for capital, but you don't want to deplete it. And those other questions, that is part of the conversation that will likely occur. Is exactly how is this funded? Is it funded out of capital? Is it bonded for? is money put aside every year for 10 years for it. If there is savings with respect to not having, not having typical seed soil side fields, can some of that savings be put in an annual account so that in 10 years there can be something? Because there, you can't run a school without a roof, but you can run a school without a turf field because you can have grass and soil fields. So it's just something, to the point of those things that, these are things just that all have to be considered in your conversations as you move forward. And in perpetuity, what are you setting as a standard? There are other fields being recommended. If they're on school grounds, will they also become the purview of, will they also become assumed to be then funded by the board? In which case, again, those are not books, those are not teachers, those are not things like that. And fields can be soil fields, but you cannot run a school without a roof, and you can't do it without these other things. So this is a difficult thing. And I'm sure there'll be some, way forward that everybody can feel good about, but there definitely needs to be a way of looking at this in the future, and not every field that is synthetic can then be assumed to be part of your budget, or it can turn into quite a big thing over the span of many years.
And thank you for that. I guess, ideally, the best thing would happen is if the town just says, oh, we'll take care of it and you don't need to worry about it.
Right.
But ideally-
You said that. That'd be
Ideally,
best case.
I mean, realistically, I don't think it's gonna be that simple. Did the FFC talk at all about any sort of thing that they might be comfortable with, or the board might be comfortable with? Because I don't know what direction that meeting would go into.
We talked a little bit about, as Dr. Willett said, we do have the ERF.
Mhm.
And I think we all said, if, possibly a smaller amount out of the ERF could be basically, a potential contribution to, starting this and figuring out how to get it funded. We were not able to, this was something we talked about, but we cannot put anything in our budget annually that just is basically a savings account. We cannot do that. We talked about possibly using, if we have any leftover funds annually, perhaps doing a split, kind of how we did the 50-50, maybe that would be something that we could consider in the future. But those were, we didn't really throw out any specific numbers because I, or I should say I did, but then I don't want to, I'm gonna try to say this. Dr. Willett will be here. So we threw out some numbers, but it was more hypothetical, if you will. Like, how about we took from here, took from there, and it wasn't anything that, but just some options, I guess, that we might be able to present to the council, depending on what they were thinking. But we did talk about capital, and could we bond it? Would we have to bond it in our capital budget? But then, because I guess it technically falls into the 8-year thing, but that's tough because you're not going to bond for 20 years for something that's got a 10-year useful life.
Yeah.
So we have a couple of issues with that. So these are kind of all the questions that we realized we're going to have to talk to the council about, and kind of get, honestly, like their feedback of what they're thinking. Are they thinking they're going to set anything aside for it? Or are they just thinking maybe we just put it into the capital? Maybe they've got cash, like what you were saying, and that this could be something that doesn't get bonded, but still gets paid out of some sort of a capital account.
Yeah,
There's a lot more, I think, questions and answers.
probably not gonna be resolved on.
No, on November 29th, I don't think so, but we can hope.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, because how many years left was there on there? Because there's 2 different numbers that kept coming up.
It's probably 2 years from, we got like an extra year because we didn't really use it
That's
much in
what it was.
2020. So we're probably looking at 2023 for replacement.
Understand?
Okay.
I was, again, listening to FFC, kind of looking through the history. I never thought I'd say this, but I have a hard time advocating for us to pay for the turf field. Just because I heard there's a lot of use of it and the kids, you immediately think like, this is what they want. But at the end of the day, when it was put in, I don't think it was really expected that the board would be responsible for it. So even, like you said, like if there's other fields that come up, like, are we eventually going to have to pay for things that we don't necessarily want to pay for because we do want to, improve the math curriculum or do other things that, science labs at TIS or whatever. Just throw that out there.
The wish list.
Yeah, so
Whoa. Whoa.
it's a tough one for me. So I feel like if the community really wants it, they'll rally around the council. I mean, any monies we give back to the council is technically theirs. You know what I mean? Like even, I think one year we gave money and we allocated it for parking lots, but at the end of the day, it was still in the fund balance and it's still their decision of where that money goes. So if there is money left over, I mean, we could give them some, I don't see a problem with that, but then I think that also sets the precedent that people are going to expect that there's going to be money left over. And I think that, you're not going to save $500,000 on buses every year.
I think we're talking about much smaller monies left
Yeah.
over.
So long story short, I don't know what the answer is. I guess we as a board maybe can figure out what to advocate for. And maybe in the grounds agreement, something more specific has to be in there that it's not like, we'll have I don't know. It just sounded very kumbaya and there was no decision made in the agreement, if that makes sense.
No, there wasn't.
There-
any
it's just
agreement,
like,
there was
oh, like,
no
we'll figure it
decision.
out.
Like, hey, don't forget
We'll
about it.
figure it out when we get there. And I think maybe that verbiage needs to change. I don't know.
Well, that agreement now won't be signed again though for 3 years.
Well, there's a
Right.
provision that either side can bring
Can
back to the
Okay.
table
Because
by
right now,
wanting to.
technically, we're not in compliance with it because we had it, that they needed to have a meeting with us by September, and that didn't happen.
The chair had asked for meetings.
I mean, I asked back in May. Yeah. So it's not on our fault, you know what I mean? Like,
No, I know.
we have definitely been trying to have that conversation. So, I think these are all fairly valid points, especially looking through the turf and field grounds. Like, I mean, how do we change that, just itself, the agreement? Once we actually come to terms of how we're going to actually pay for this. I mean, we say that it's $750 now, but with the prices of things in 2 years, I think we can be talking about $1 million. You could be, you know what I'm saying? Like, everything costs more in the end than what you think it does.
Well, yeah, you want to look at it carefully because, at the, it'll be great, the wisdom of having this conversation. Kudos to the town council and the board for having a joint meeting to discuss the turf field. Kudos to the board members who talked about it prior, ringing others, wanting to have something forward thinking. And these fields were generally, when they were soil, things that the town were taking care of. If they are now synthetic and some part of them are going to be assumed to be board responsibility, then if you replace many of your fields with synthetic fields, what does that mean for you in the future? So that's just something to keep in mind also as the town moves forward with respect to considering synthetics versus soils, whose responsibility, are those to maintain and fund. That's all part of your future planning in your town. And kudos to the town council and the board for taking this up.
Dana, did you have something?
Yes, it's in mind. No, but so I guess and I agree, like, I think that we should push back to the town council a lot more. We need to be advocating for like the educational purposes, like we were talking about in FFC, our supplies for our students, our supplies for our staff and those kind of things. The town does get some revenue. I know obviously COVID in 2020 and even parts of 2021, they haven't yielded as those results because of things have been minimized, but it is utilized quite a bit for the town, right? So, I mean, I guess you could say, why would we bond for one thing and not the other, like the turf field versus the track, or, you know what I'm saying? So I think that there's an opportunity, but I don't disagree. Tony said something like, as a community, we come together and figure it out together. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do that. I think we should. I think we should sit down on the table, whatever that looks like, on the 29th and what have you, but I mean, it's a nice field. It's a nice thing for the entire community. It's not just the high school students that are utilizing it. I mean, we have UConn students using it, we have, you know, the soccer community using it, and the football community is using it, and they do camps over the summer. So there is a lot of town use, and again, we were talking about like my Birch Grove Building Committee conversations that we had, like, I think we definitely need to get some more clarity and really sit down and hammer down some finite, there's too much gray, but like even Pete Sabo was saying, like, if you put a fence around a field, we were talking about Birch Grove community, if you put a fence around a field, they'll mow up to this part or trim up to this part, and then we'll trim up to this part, but then who weed whacks like along the fence line? Like, it's silly stuff, so I definitely think this is a lot bigger than weed whacking on fence line, so we need some more fun. I know it's a silly thing to do, but I mean, it literally can go to that much detail, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Willett, but I definitely think you'll put back I mean, I don't know if it's short-term bonding, and I know we talked about it like 10 years in a 20-year bond, that's stupid, right? So what are some other bonding options and on lesser terms? Is that something that's realistic? I think it's time to get a little creative. I'm concerned that we're gonna get pushed back on as the Board of Ed, and it's our job to make sure, like you said, we have the resources for our students. And then we talk about the surplus money, and then we talk about the COVID relief bit going away, and how are we gonna offset that going forward, and then tack this onto our budget. We're gonna even be just that much more on the opposite end of the pendulum. I don't like this $796,000 talk, because it seems like we have all this surplus money when in all actuality we don't, right? We have so many things down the road, and again, it's not just this fiscal year, it's not this coming budget, it's not just this church situation. We need to look, 5 years, 10 years down the road, and how we can continue to flourish the school system. And I think I'm just really nervous that this is gonna be pushed back and be a sole board responsibility. I mean, don't get me wrong, I want it for our town, I want it for our students, I want it for our community. I just think, I don't know. That's,
A few years ago,
no, that's it.
oh, sorry, I apologize. A few years ago, I did some analysis and looked at, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, with respect to your unfunded mandates and how much you were picking up today that you weren't picking up before.
Mhm.
And whenever you think about conversations about 10 years into the future, it's not necessarily us that will be here, but what will you leave that board with and those people with? 10 years ago, I think it's something like, and I don't want to get too, it's millions. So you're spending millions more now on things that you did not have to spend that amount on in, a decade or two ago. Decade or two from now, you may have more millions that you must spend because of unfunded mandates. So you have to be very careful what you consider as, what belongs here versus there, et cetera, or what kinds of structures you set up now. You're borrowing from the future board.
Mhm.
So you just have to keep that in mind. And again, those structures, if you're going to borrow from the future board, make sure that it's for things that affect students' lives, education, books, teachers, special ed, the RTIs or BIs, these kinds of things. That's the business of education. Soil fields versus turf fields, nice, but not necessarily the business of education, whether it's a soil field or a turf field. That's a financial town and whatever decision for future. But we can run with either type of field. Those kids are still going to need the books. They're still going to need the SRBI, and you're still probably going to have another set of $1 million mandates 10 years from now, just like you did today, that didn't exist before. And it is in millions, maybe 7 or something like that. That is part of today that wasn't part of before. So that's it's so complex of an issue. It's just taking everybody's minds. Again, kudos to the council, to the board for being, having the forethought to want to have that conversation and not be in a trap 10 years from now or 20 years from now.
I did. I have actually a question for Ms. Griffin. It looks like in Dr. Willett's packet that he gave to us, since 2015, the town's made about $128,000 from the field. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that
And
sounds
it's in the
about right.
towns and stuff too.
So would it be appropriate to ask them, like going forward, to allocate any money that they make, any revenue from the field to its maintenance?
Oh, absolutely. I think that they are supposed to be putting that money aside. I do think that it has gone down considerably. I know, Dana, you had mentioned UConn. UConn has their own nice turf field. They don't use ours anymore. So I'm not sure. I do think that lacrosse, football, and soccer still use it. But I mean, their payments to date, it's about $15,000 a year from for those three sports. I don't really, my knowledge, and this, like you said, this is where Rainey would have been more helpful. I think she really had dug in her to find out more about this. I don't think there's really many more people who use the field, and I think that was unfortunately what had happened back in 2013. I think there was this grandiose plan that so many people were gonna rent the field, and I don't think that really came to fruition. So I do think that, yes, we can definitely ask them like what will happen with the revenue. I just don't think it's probably enough to really make a dent in what we're gonna need.
Gotcha.
So that's just my,
I want to say when they talked about it, they had a different number than we did for the rental fee, what town council talked
is it
about.
less or more? Do
It
you
was
remember?
less.
Okay,
I want to say it was like 80,000 versus the 1.8. But it was when they had, 86,000.
Oh, see,
Well, I think that's a portion of it.
Yeah.
It's two things together that make the
But,
one.
but there was something that when they were talking, it didn't match what we had. And that's why I was confused, because I didn't know Mike, because Mike and Lisa should have the same information. So unless they're not adding something in, because I was trying to, watch the town council meeting when I was taking care of Clara. So, kind of the little pieces, bits that you hear, you're like, wait a minute,
It'll be interesting.
something
What we have is what was provided to us from that. When
from
those
Mike.
requests were made. Yeah.
Okay, so that's something I'm gonna to look into prior to going into the joint, because I want to say that they only had the 86 and not the
I'm wondering if
42 included.
it says revenue generated by recreation department.
Right,
I'm
those are-
wondering if
there's
that
two
goes back
parts.
into to run those programs.
Yeah,
So for example, I think they have like running club in the summer that you pay to them or something. I'm wondering if that goes back to cover their program cost, but doesn't go necessarily into the,
so maybe that's what the
Something
difference
like that,
was
maybe.
between the two.
There are two chunks to what they have, though, like two things come together to make the 100 something. So I just don't have it in front of me right now, but that might be part of it.
Okay,
There's
because
two
like I said,
pieces to what they have for, whatever they've raised. And those two together come up are 100 something.
Initially, there was some grants used to fund the field. Is that an option, applying for grants?
Well, I mean,
That again, Jen?
There, in the initial report, there were.
it was a
two
$500,000
grants,
state grant and a state
Small town
DEP.
grant, small town grant.
500, 200, bond issuance of 300,000 and municipal funds of 38. Is that what you have?
Oh, right here.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
small town economic assistance.
Oh, that was the
program,
steep grant.
And then this, oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, any grants that are available, I'm sure we would go for, but right now, I think that if they were there, they would go for them. That was the town.
That was the town.
so the town had issued.
This was mostly a town endeavor that understandably had great benefits for everyone, but this was at the time put together as a package through the efforts of people, mostly on the town side, that then, ultimately there were great benefits to the community for. But some of it was going to be raised by individual community organizations and sports. Some of it was too steep, some of it was an investment that was funded private.
Yeah, go ahead. I don't know, if this is even okay question to ask, but is there a possibility for selling advertising on the field to local businesses, like?
They've
back
done that.
then?
They experimented with that, having signs and so, I think it's just, again, the revenue generated is compared to the amount that is ultimately needed. That is something the town has an option of and did, I think, explore at one point. What happened to that eventually, not sure, but we don't have them everywhere, so I think that just might have fallen to the wayside. But again, the amount of money that they, I think, were going to generate from that was It's not necessarily.
So I think the cool thing is Jen, as the chair of the communications committee, right? Are you, am I allowed to say that?
Don't get
Like
to it.
being a liaison to other boards, like I feel like you probably have some great fundraising experience from the PTO side of things. I think that's, we could probably rally the community to come together and help fund this without necessarily it coming out of our,
I mean, we certainly have, plenty of contacts in
Yeah.
town that, we've reached out to throughout the years that I could see donating, but again, I see Dr. Willett's point that, it would be minimal. I mean, maybe it would be something that would be, yearly or where you get a sign on, like you said, on the back fence for a certain amount of money and it could, or 3 months or 6 months or 9 months or during a particular sports season, but that's how I think they pay for some of the things in Little League, the scoreboards and not, they're
Yeah.
sponsored by local businesses. So that was what kind of gave me the idea too.
Much lower
they have
cost.
great ideas.
I'm happy to look into it.
Superintendent Dunphy.
A lot of candy bars.
That's
a lot of dogs.
Oregon Girl Scouts.
You can arrange for that.
Lordy,
Every
so,
dollar counts.
Ashley.
yes,
Just,
Griffin.
so just to kind of conclude, so we talked about a whole lot in FFC, but we didn't actually put together anything to present to the council on the turf field side. So I just want you to know that. I don't know how exactly you want to initiate the discussion for the joint meeting, but I mean, pretty much everything we've talked about today is what we talked about earlier, and we didn't really have kind of that concrete one pager, if you will, the way we have for the CRF. So
I think that would be kind of hard to create
Yeah.
one pager on
on
something
this,
that's such
because
a
it's so.
conversation.
Yeah. So anyway, I just want you to know, so if you're looking for someone to lead that, I'm gonna give that right back to you.
Why don't we give it to them?
Yeah.
We're leading the first conversation, why don't they lead the second conversation?
There you go.
That's fair.
There you go. Because I think at
I
the
think-
end, it was, if it was a town council purchase per se, I think, I mean, it's so hard.
This is so hard because like looking at this, like the STEEP grant and the DEEP grant, I don't know, well, I don't know if you remember, Dr. Willis, I think that was almost brought about by some community members who did that. I don't wanna,
Yeah.
Kinda
I mean, I
similar
walked
to
in
the
on this a
Miracle
few years
Field.
after,
I think somebody got this great idea and went after it. So I'm not even sure exactly, it was kind of before I was paying attention to too closely. I don't know how the town even completely got involved in that. I just remember at the time, the only thing, I can't remember if we had to vote on it or if it was just talked about, was the bond issuance of 300,000. I think that was really the only thing that was kind of for the residents to worry about, if you will. I think the rest of it was kind of paid for.
this road was definitely paved by good intentions.
Yes.
I'm thinking 128, when I look at this, youth soccer contributed 33,000, youth lacrosse, 28,000, youth football, 25,000 was the, and then 42,000 was the revenue. That's where you get the 128, was raised, for this theoretically that is there then. It is there at this time.
It's somewhere.
Right, that's what was raised to date.
Okay.
And that's where that 128 comes from. Just adding it up.
Just a quick question, Dr. Willett. It also says somewhere on here, I'm trying to find the chart again. Sports organization contribution with 15-year payback. One, what the heck is that? Just the newbie question. And then two, does that need to be extended a year because we did lose the 2020, I think, fall and winter, I guess, and then I think spring stuff started to sort of pop back up. So does that need to be extended another year, or if nothing was paid to the board?
Yeah, at the time, organizations committed a certain amount to fund this. And what's hard about that is, I may be in charge of, youth elephant riding right now, but Tony may take over youth elephant riding 3 years from now. And Tony doesn't have any idea what I committed us to, or is not quite sure. So that's kind of how some of that was able to be raised and some of it was not. I think that's, again, the lessons learned by the good intentions of those that put it together the first time. You have the opportunity not to have history repeat itself in this particular scenario, and for there to be a methodology, and if there is an amount spent that used to be on upkeep, potentially that amount could be set aside yearly to offset the future cost of whatever, of this field. And if other fields are added in the future in your town, potentially you would want to figure out how, what is saved by not using soil, and then potentially put that aside for the next 10 years so that you would then have something against that field. So the more of these fields you have, I think the thing is, these fields do not mean they're not no-cost fields. You don't put them in and then suddenly you never have to spend another dollar. Whereas you're saving the money on the soil, the sod, and all that other stuff, eventually you have to replace this thing until they create a technology that makes them last for 100 years. They seem to last about 10 to 15 years and then need to be fixed or, largely replaced. And so that's the conundrum right now, is that we've entered that point, and if the town is moving into the future and going to have more of these, they have benefits, then how will, maybe something has to be set aside so that 10-year point, there is something there. Otherwise, like anything else, if you don't put money aside over a span of time, you're going to have to bond or do something for it. If we set aside, that's why you have, some of the things you've got as structures here, both on the town and the board side, you look forward to what is going to happen and then figure out how to accommodate that as it comes. And so you have a great opportunity right now to look forward and say, oh, are we going to have more of these? If we do, how was it previously funded? How should we do it forward? That type of thing. When it was soil, how was it funded? Now that it's turf, how is it funded? Why does the type of field make a difference? Does it make a difference? Who funds it? That type of thing.
I think you sound like you have wonderful questions to add to the page for the town council.
I like to just leave it. Can I just,
Yeah.
answer, Jaden, just to your point, I think the 300,000 was what was bonded. And I think it was more just about, oh, hey, over 15 years, we're gonna get these sports groups to pay us back. So I think that's how they kind of said to the town people, it's not gonna really affect you because look, we're gonna get all that back.
Gotcha.
So that's my understanding from kind of the history of everything I've read. So I think so, actually, so you can actually say that in the next 8 years of sports revenue has almost already been spent. You want to look at it that way, but we won't. So-
Go ahead, Jacob.
Yeah, just a couple of quick comments. I think it's probably not a big deal. We don't have like a super specific plan for the 29th. Maybe we see what happens and then we regroup and have a special meeting or something and figure out what's going on. And just to Christina's point, I think Dana's point a while back about our obligations with regards to other fields and not setting a precedent, with what we pay for and trying to focus on the true educational needs. I do agree that we need to make sure that that gets hammered down in the fields of ground agreement. If there is some sort of exception or if we have to make some sort of compromise with this field, we need to make it very clear that this is a special case and, it's not, we need to delineate what our responsibilities are very clearly with everything else so we don't set a bad precedent. I just want to back up onto that.
Perfect. So any other?
Can I say one more thing? Just in response to that, I'm thinking though, as a board, let's say the council says they want to turn it back to grass. And if we wanted to advocate to keep it, it wouldn't hurt for us to come to the table with something.
Yeah,
It's not just putting it all on them
No,
and then
I agree
saying,
with that.
well, no, we have to.
That's
You
a good
have to
point.
pay for it. I'm just saying, like,
Well,
if they decide that it's more cost effective to turn it to grass, but we came up with a mutual plan to help go forward with it, I wouldn't be opposed to that. I mean, that's just right now, like you said, not wanting to set a precedent that like, oh, we'll just handle it, you know, it's more
Figuring out how to
figuring it out how to move.
not dig other holes for ourselves.
Yeah. Sorry.
So I don't know if it was this that we talked about last time when you reached directly out to Tammy, the chair at the time. Have you had a chance to reach out to Steve to see, like, iron out the expectations prior to the meeting?
No, I wanted to see exactly where we were from here. I'm going to reach out to him actually about a couple other things. So I will be including that in an email.
No, that's awesome. Thank you. It'd be nice to walk into that room and. we're
Yeah,
gonna
no,
be-
I think that, you know, to Sophia's point, I mean, the CRF funds are really what we are asking and what we're creating. So if we have the one pager to have that conversation to start that with. In terms of the turf field, if it is a town council base, I mean, I still think that we should perhaps either, you know, I can work with Dr. Willard to create, not necessarily a one pager, but, you know, to kind of put some of these questions down that you had raised and kind of just put the information that we had for tonight so that we can talk to that, the truths of what we've, you know, what have we found, or, you know, the history to it from what our understanding is. And to your point, you know, if it's a grass field versus a synthetic field, you know, what's the difference? How does it, you know, so I think that the whole conversation needs to just really take place along with the town council and our board, and to, obviously, to Christina, like, if they just say, well, that's it, we're just gonna get rid of it and put grass, and we're like, well, no, I mean, we do like the field, we just don't like the expense of the field.
That's why you gotta, I don't know, come with something.
So I think that at least we have a game plan in place, and I think by having that now, going back to Steve, I can write a little bit better of an email about what the expectations are for a conversation, I would say.
No, I don't know if I'm allowed to do this, but do you have an opinion on this? That you guys see that turf field every day? I'm just curious. You know, I'm not to put you on the spot. You don't have, you can say,
You
don't
don't
talk
have
to
to
me.
take his position.
Right, at all. I'm just curious. I'm just curious if you hear anything, you see anything in specific that.
I just think students would be more excited to have it stay as a turf field. I think it's utilized a lot for sports and like after school activities like that. And I just think it would be a better response to students that stay as turf. But I understand what other stuff if it doesn't.
You know, it's important that you speak it because it's your daily life at the school,
Yeah.
right? You guys are living it, you know,
Yeah,
so
we
it's
use it
super
a
important.
lot.
that we express.
Like gym classes too,
Right.
go out there and stuff like that. So, yeah.
Good to know.
Not putting you on the spot. But this is something that even when I was in school 2 years ago with Jacob, I'm sure when you were 3 or 4 years ago, going to senior year gym class and you're going outside and throwing a frisbee or something, and it's a nice soft turf field. And so we have opinions on the field as former students as well, but I just wanted to check in and figure it out. So
I
thank you.
feel you'll be put on the spot more.
Couple times.
So I think we're all set with this, the turf field. So we will move on to the screen to stay. We'll go back to Dr. Willett.
All right, so I'm gonna share the screen again, which will create chaos for everybody at home as I bounce in and out. Okay, so screen to stay was an option that was recently provided by the state of Connecticut for school systems. You heard us talking, when we talking a little bit about the potential for test to stay, and that other states had successfully used test to stay over a period of time. And so we were looking and hoping that something like it would arrive in Connecticut. And about 2-3 weeks ago, something like that, the DPH announced a screen to stay. And the original iteration or version of screen to stay was that people had to fill out a tremendous amount of really paperwork and tracking, and nurses had to meet with people and all that. That was version 1 of screen to stay. Then the next week, DPH came out with yet another version of screen to stay, which essentially allows us to, if the child is a close contact within a school context, and that's the key. If the child is a close contact within a school context, that can be a classroom, that can be a bus, then they have the option of screen to stay. And the version in Tolland is that we contact the parent and say, your child was a close contact with a student who tested positive for COVID. Please monitor your child for the following symptoms over the next 14 days. And if they show any of these symptoms, immediately call the nurse and please keep your child home. That's Tolland's version of screen to stay that is allowed by the DPH now for any child who is a close contact in a school context. That is not the case for anyone, say, involved in sports or unified sports or parties or birthdays or activities outside of school. Those situations still require quarantine, and the same rules apply of out of school for 10 days. You can test back in after the 5th, 6th, 7th day, et cetera, et cetera. So these slides give you a general, better kind of look at it. Screen to stay, allow students and staff who are unvaccinated or partially vaccinated to remain in school after close contact with COVID case, provided one, the only contact occurred during the school day, no extracurricular, no other stuff like that. If indoors on a school bus or other transportation, and both the contact and the person that is positive have masks. If outdoors, masks are unmasked, mask breaks, PPE, things like that. And if the contact remains asymptomatic, meaning they show no signs of illness. So those are the conditions under which we can offer a family screen to stay. Examples of close contacts that would not support screen to stay are contacts with a case during interscholastic or other athletic activities. So anything that happens as a result of sports, still outside quarantine. Contact occurring during social interactions or similar activities outside of school, AKA birthday parties, dining out, sleepovers. As an aside, a lot of the impacts that we did have in school were due to things like that, were due to what happened, say, at a sports team outside, or sleepovers, things like that. Contact where the case or case contact is not consistently or correctly wearing a mask. So again, the mask eating is really important. Mask eating. Freudian slip. The mask wearing is very important. If we are not doing that, we cannot say that. So if a student does not have a mask on and they're in a close contact with someone who's nearby, that student, because they were not wearing a mask at the time that they were close to that COVID positive student, is now going to be quarantined. So there are still many, many conditions under which someone has an out-of-school quarantine, which means we have to continue the structures that we have, because we still do have kids that are not. What does change this is vaccinations, because then it doesn't really matter whether you have, you are or not. If you are vaccinated and you are not feeling sick, you are not quarantined. So vaccinated close contacts are encouraged to test it after the 5th or 7th day, but they are not quarantined regardless. So the way people can avoid any of this is just vaccination. That's why the DPH #1 strategy that it repeats constantly at every single meeting is that every effort should be made to facilitate vaccinations and make those available easily for everyone, et cetera, et cetera. Other things, this is essentially summarizing just that, other examples. It's only applying to in-person learning. Regular quarantine procedures continue to be used, and this is starting to get repetitive. So just, you get the general idea, and there's many slides and they're continually repetitive. So it's just more about, hey, if then chart, which they already kind of told us what to do up here, but they have if then charts just in case we weren't sure. So that's essentially it. So the Tolland Public Schools has put this into effect. It is much better for children and parents. children are and have been subject to quarantine and then been part of the screen stay. And so far, it's been very successful in keeping, the kids that have in-school contact in school. Now, parents have the right to choose a quarantine if they so desire, and some of them do. So when there is a close contact situation, the communication that goes out does specify, here's what we're going to do, but you have the right to invoke a quarantine if you so desire, and the parent can invoke that quarantine in some time. They've said, okay, well, I'm gonna keep them home, and they can. And then we continue to do the services we've done, the AEs and all the other pieces to it. So the other piece is, as a link here, I did put the information that's here is also in our Tolland plan. Here's the acronym. And it's like the military. Safe return to in-person. Yeah, all that data expanded instruction and continuity of services plan. So if you jump to screen to stay, which I think is, then you'll see what this essentially a version of this message goes to parents when they have a situation where their child is a close contact, and it essentially says, here's full status, et cetera, please monitor for these symptoms. If you do see these symptoms, please make sure that you contact the school nurse and so on. So it it does trust our families and our parent guardians with that job, and if they are sick, they call and we activate the scenarios that you're aware of. What this does do for us, though, this is much better for children. It is another layer of work for us because now we have 3 different categories. We have the vaccinated, the unvaccinated, 4 actually, the screen to stays and the quarantines, and we track them all. And there's different things we have to do for each. So my messages when I send them out are differentiated based on the condition of the child. If you're vaccinated, you get one, and asymptomatic, you get one message. If you're unvaccinated, you get another, and if you're quarantined, you get other communications. And there's different processing things we have to do for each. So the steps to execute one close contact, last year required maybe a couple of steps. Now close contacts and COVIDs require many more steps because there's many things you have to do in different groups. So this is, though, again, great for families because the children do not all have to be out and they have a choice.
It's a great move in the right direction. In terms of quarantines, I know we still have some, but you have kind of a rough estimate as to how much that's dropped off or how much you expect it to drop off?
They match more or less to some extent the percentage of vaccinations versus unvaccinated, a little bit less than that, and it depends on the age group. So I would say, and it also depends on community prevalence and what's going on. I would say we've reduced it by half, But the thing about that is it's tricky because you'll need to have those structures in place, whether it's 5 or 10. You still have to have the service. If there's 5 who need it, there still has to be those people doing it. And then there's also other things like special education has certain needs, students with RTIS or BI needs, so some of those situations, you can't do it without these services until quarantines are not needed at all. And that may come somewhere in February, March, April, maybe. So I'm really hoping for that.
Yes.
But right now, we're still, every time something happens, I still have to post a list. We still have to reach out. I have meetings with associate educators every week. They still have to reach out to families, and we still have to go through, the whole process.
Thank you.
Was looking in the information you were showing there where it specified, the unvaccinated or partially vaccinated could qualify for screen to stay if, and then had the list of, properly wearing their masks and stuff. And then went down to the vaccinated, and like I said, that vaccination is pretty much the game changer at that point. Given that, are we seeing any sort of movement on this as far as the mask requirements with the vaccinations now?
We still have to have everybody wear masks at this point. I do expect some of that, I mean, this is just total conjecture, but by February 26th, because things do change. And executives' powers and so on change exactly around February 26th. And so I can see maybe something changing with respect to masks at that, in that time, especially if you're vaccinated. But I don't know for sure. But right now, everybody still has to wear masks, vaccinated or unvaccinated.
I saw eating on the list of quarantining. Does that mean school lunch, close contacts would still be quarantined?
Yeah, it depends on the circumstances around it. So a lot of times, if there's the right controls in place, we don't have to do, we can still offer screening. But we do examine the circumstances. So, you know, if somebody's being particularly rambunctious and, you know, sometimes that happens, you know, then we would have to consider it different. But if, you know, if it's a controlled environment and there's a certain amount of spacing and all of that, then screen to stay is available. Screen to stay is almost universally going to be possible for most families unless it's an out of school situation. That's really where it gets much stickier. And people get very frustrated, understand, because you know, we have all kinds of things. My daughter's involved with sports too. You know, you have those, you have activities, you have things, and then that if that happens there, and they're unvaccinated, they're still out. And it is hard.
So for the sports, does that include the school sports that you have to wear a mask, like volleyball, for example? Will that?
Well, the rules about mask wearing in sports are the same. You know, the screen to stay. If you're involved in sports, you're still out.
Okay, so even if it's a school
Yeah,
sport, that you have to wear a
you're
mask.
quarantined if you're involved in interscholastic sports.
Okay.
That's unfortunately one of those not categories.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you, Dr. Willett. Let's move on to committee and liaison reports, which are all new. So I did want to just put it onto the record after I had shuffled everybody so that you would have, let's start off, FFC. We have Griffin as chair. The members are going to be Tony, Jacob, and Dana. Forever hold your peace if you have any other questions, because this all went out to everybody. So then negotiations, we have Ford as the chair with members Griffin and Jen. For curriculum, we have Jacob as chair. The members are Jaden and Ford. Communications, we have Jen as chair with members for Griffin and then Sophia. Then we have policy with Tony as chair with Claude and Sophia. Mental health task force, we have Jaden, Jacob, and Tony. And COVID, we still have Claude and Dana for however long that COVID task force is gonna. He's looking over there.
February?
So write that down. And then we still have Birch Grove, which Dana is going to complete that up. So I believe I had everyone's request, and so I had sent that email out, but if you didn't see it, I just wanted to have that on the record for notes. And FFC did meet, but I think that you've pretty much.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything else to
given
say.
everything.
Most I've ever talked.
So at this point, I'm gonna go ahead and if anyone else has anything.
Birch Grove did meet.
Oh,
I was
right, it's
skipping.
on.
So, we're gonna be meeting, we set schedule for the beginning of the year, because there's still some things that need to be wrapped up. The swing set's supposed to be, the big thing is the swing set. It's supposed to be here, it's shipping next week. So it should be arriving post Thanksgiving at some point, weather permitting. So they said weather permitting, it should be installed fairly quickly. Weather permitting meaning frozen ground, snow, or mud, simply because of the drainage and that kind of stuff. So that would be the only thing that would derail it. And there's a handful of small things, some backorder items that are slowly trickling in, and some broken things that arrived, they're swapping out. But D'Amato's completely off the project. So it's just like the small fine tune stuff, but the big thing is the swings.
Perfect. Exciting. Thank you. Okay, let's go to our chairperson's report. I just wanted to wish everyone a wonderful Thanksgiving because that is coming up. I do want to say we still need to have, whether this is communication, a reminder for these half days. So, we got to get something out there to remind parents like this is a half day. And I know Thanksgiving is coming up and people are going to be looking at their calendar and yes, Thanksgiving is here.
Oh, I
So-
love the text message.
So, let's work on that to just make sure, because even today with the half day with students, I think sometimes parents get caught off guard. So, whether somehow we create something, I think that would be important. But essentially, next week, I can't believe it, once again, is Thanksgiving, which is crazy to me. And time is going by very fastly. So we will have the town council update on the 29th. I still would like to schedule the FOIA with Jessica, which we just got to talk to her anyways. And then I did ask her about the CABE. So she was saying that for the Board of Ed to come together as a working unit to use CABE for that. So we will process that, whether we do it, I guess, would it be library room?
I can set all of that up.
Well, the library, or I guess we could even use the library at the high school as well,
Yeah, yep, definitely.
because I feel like the library room has definitely been booked with certain,
Yeah. Our school library easiest place. for
that's
me
what I'm
was
thinking, so
schedule
perhaps
for
we can
us.
do that. So that was the other thing I wanted to say. And that was it for my chairperson's report that I just wanted to touch base on. So we don't have any board act. Did you have something?
I'll say it during points. I was
Okay.
thinking, you reminded me of something.
Okay, so then there's no board action, so I can open up public participation again. If you could, please list your name and address, and if you're online, you just have to raise your hand. And if you could, please list your name and address for the record. So we have Kate, and Dr. will come up with this timer.
And you're ready.
Hi. You guys good? Ready?
Yeah.
Yes, can you hear me?
You're good.
Okay, thank you. So Kate Howard Bender, 103 Goose. First, it's so nice to hear some talk about long-term planning and not waiting for someone else to swoop in with the solutions. It's really great. It's high time the elected officials across the boards and across party work together to support the needs of the whole town. Strategic and long-term plans are absolutely indicated in all arenas regarding our students and our town. I just want to remind you quickly of your charge with 10-220. The boards of education shall provide an appropriate learning environment for its students, which include books and materials, equitable allocation of resources, proper maintenance of facilities, and a safe school setting. With regard to the extended field discussion, I understand that this is a pressing issue due to timing, but I don't think it's appropriate to use any kind of rescue funding or rainy day funding to address it. What I think would be appropriate would be for the town manager to devise a long-term maintenance plan with a short-term bond request like the track. I'm also concerned with the amount of time and effort expended on the discussion of the athletic field. Of much more pressing concern is the social, emotional, and academic transition back to full-time school with which our students and our educators are struggling. I did attend the FFC today, and I was really pleased to hear Mr. Holt doesn't think we should kick the can anymore. I couldn't agree more. It's time to advocate for the needs of the children under your charge. This means honestly and ardently expressing the needs of the Board of Education of the Town Council. Board of Ed members cannot be afraid to say what is needed. It's needed, so it needs to be said. You can't be afraid of the council. They're good people. You are a duly elected Board of Education. You guys got this. That's it. Be well. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you, Kate. If there's anyone else, if you could please raise your hand. Going once, going twice. I will close out the public participation, which brings us into points of information. And Laura, do you want to have something?
Oh, just in regards to Kate, you guys probably aren't signed up for the emails yet, but December 8th, there's a new board member and new leadership information seminar. Sent it to them. Sent it to them. It did.
Oh, you did? Okay. There's just some
pretty
good stuff on there.
Yeah, it was a
I
good
went-
training.
I went a couple years ago as a new board member and I didn't go last year for leadership, but I'm sure there's some
I
good
didn't know
stuff
they
in there
had
too.
anything left.
Maybe I'll go anyway. That's all I had.
Thank you, yeah.
Cave did get hacked though recently, did you notice that?
Mhm.
Oh, no.
So your user IDs and passwords will not work. Which may explain why Walter Will was in the meeting that you were. Where it was not me.
Interesting.
There was a doppelganger in one of those meetings.
Texting
In any
Walt.
case, something happened, so none of your stuff, they'll be resetting that for some time, so just.
Anything else?
I just have one thing, and I don't know when the right time is, but right before COVID hit, we had a great walkthrough at TIS. And then we had the virtual one at TMS, which I thought was fantastic. I know we've been talking about doing more presentations as we're progressing, but I don't know short-term or long-term what that looks like in doing another school walkthrough.
No, I think that would be,
Revisiting
I
something
like
like
the
that.
idea.
Yeah, we are planning.
Okay, and that's it.
Yeah, no, I think that that would be important. I mean, obviously, the old members have not hit TIS. Not TIS, but the high school. I was thinking TIS, we actually went virtually, not in person before everything came crashing down. But I think it would be great to have our new members as well, still see Verge, TIS, things of that nature. I think it's a good board member.
Yeah, absolutely. We're planning, they're called instructional rounds, or I call them. So we will definitely do those, yes.
Okay. Anything else? And we do not have future any business, so therefore I will entertain a motion for adjournment.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Let's discussion. I don't think so. So all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? We are adjourned.